Thank you very much. One of the symbols of New Zealand is the kiwi. That is the bird, not the fruit or the shoe polish. It is nocturnal, flightless, protected as it's in danger of extinction. What a great national symbol. Well, I'm one of them who has taken flight at your gracious invitation to be part of this symposium. Thank you for this privilege and for your very warm welcome to Salt Lake City and Provo. I'd also like to acknowledge the co-presenters today, Father Brian Lucas and Sheikh Abdur Rahman Ahmad. It is a joy to share with you. This morning I would like to reflect with you on interreligious freedom and collaboration in New Zealand, with some examples of current practice and some challenges that face us on the road ahead. But first of all, once a historian, you are tainted for life. And I'd just like to give a little brief historical background to religious freedom in New Zealand today. The Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840 between the Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, and the Crown, is the founding document of New Zealand. For many years, it was the closest we ever had to a written constitution. The fourth article of this Treaty of Waitangi guarantees religious freedom. The article was added to the Maori text of the treaty at the request of the Roman Catholic Bishop Jean-Baptiste Pompallier, who was present at the proceedings. The translation reads, "The governor says that the several faiths, beliefs of England, of the Wesleyans, of Rome, and also of Maori custom shall alike be protected by him." End of quote. And we need to recall the historical context, aware that there was no love lost between Catholic Bishop Pompallier and the British colonisers. The memory of Waterloo in 1815 was as fresh as yesterday. The fourth article then was designed more to protect the rights of Roman Catholics in the face of a dominant Anglican and Protestant majority. Over the years, it has been interpreted as an article protecting religious freedom in general, and in particular, the religion and the customs of the indigenous Maori people. The Catholic Church still continues to take this responsibility seriously. Church statements in 1989 and 1995, at the time of the sesquicentenary of the treaty, continue this theme. The treaty is described as a covenant, a taonga in Maori, with all the depth of the biblical notion of covenant. And today this entails a commitment to reconciliation and the restoration of confiscated land. The treaty has been observed in the breach. And we have a long history of betrayal of the fine principles of this Treaty of Waitangi, not only with regard to land, but with regard to language, to culture, and traditional Maori religious values. The Waitangi Tribunal, over the last 40 years, has achieved some measure of healing and national reconciliation. This covenant, in the words of the bishops in 1990, is also the moral basis for the presence of all other peoples in New Zealand. All other immigrants and refugees who have arrived since 1840. And we have had to remind our Prime Minister of that recently. New Zealand today is a multicultural, secular, democratic society, just over 4.5 million, a very small city by American standards. Freedom of religious belief is guaranteed by law, for example, the New Zealand Bill of Rights in 1990, and an aspirational document, the New Zealand Statement on Religious Diversity of 2007, and subsequent documents. Over half of New Zealanders identify themselves as being Christian, the main denominations being Anglican, Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, and Pentecostal. In recent years, there has been a significant increase in numbers of non-Christian. The landscape of religion, and therefore of religious freedom, is changing. Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Sikh make up the most significant minority religions. According to the last census in 2013, and following the pattern of the previous one, approximately 1/3 of the population today indicate no religion, and they too claim, and rightfully so, religious freedom. Just a couple of comments about current religious collaboration. The days of fierce intolerance of other faiths and religions, fortunately, are over. Even in my parents' lifetime, I can remember them talking about advertisements in the paper that said, Catholics need not apply. And my father had to get special permission from the bishop to attend Otago University, fierce fortress of Presbyterians. I am not sure if this tolerance is necessarily out of respect. My suspicion is that it's more a question of indifference or apathy. Religion, so what? Let's face it, the All Blacks are much more important. The most visible forms of religious collaboration are in social services and practical projects such as night shelter services, environmental projects, advocacy on behalf of the most vulnerable, and particularly in refugee resettlement. The picture is actually encouraging and hope-filled, especially in the light of several threats to religious freedom that I would now like to mention. There are two major categories I'd like to comment on. One is bioethics, and the second is on social concerns. Both Mr. Wilson and Father Brian Lucas have spoken about the same-sex marriage discussion which is underway in Australia. Well, New Zealand is a couple of steps ahead. With the Redefinition of Marriage Act of 2014, please note the title. It's a redefinition of marriage. And the basic comment is, let's get on with it. We live with it. But I would like to acknowledge the contribution of a Latter-day Saints Member of Parliament, who wasn't elected because he was Latter-day Saints, Sua William Sio, Labour Party member for Mangere in South Auckland, who led the opposition to the bill during the second and third stages, and in particular the advocacy he did in collaboration with other faith communities, not only Christian, but also particularly with the Muslim community, to ensure that ministers of religion, who are also marriage celebrants in New Zealand, would not be forced to conduct same-sex marriages. It wasn't all that clear in the earlier drafts. The bill has gone through, it has become Act, and we live with it. It's interesting that the numbers of people applying for same-sex marriage as an upgrade, in inverted commas, of the civil union which they contracted since 2006 is not as high as originally anticipated. I put in brackets, and I'll say it, except for the marriage tourism, particularly of Australians who come to New Zealand to get married under New Zealand law. The second area of concern about religious freedom is the obligation on doctors and nurses to assist at abortions. The law allowing abortions in New Zealand up to 20 weeks with 2 certifying consultants was passed in 1977. Up till now, there was a provision for doctors and nurses to refuse to participate in such procedures, and this has generally been upheld. Most recently, however, there has been controversy around the question of parental consent, focused on the case of a girl under the age of 16 to have an abortion. And rather like the question that Father Brian raised about a 15-year-old with a gun, we would raise the same question about parental consent for a girl under the age of 16 to have an abortion. The end-of-life choice bill is back on the table in the New Zealand Parliament. And earlier this year, Lucretia Seals, a young lawyer in her early 40s with terminal brain cancer, took her case to court to ensure that her doctor, if asked to assist with euthanasia, would not be prosecuted. The court, as you will imagine, upheld the current law by which the doctor would be prosecuted. Lucretia Seals died within 3 hours of hearing the result of that court case, of natural causes, surrounded in hospice care by her family. Her case and the language around it was highly emotional, but now is the time, as several speakers have already said, to find a common language around which we can conduct this debate around the end-of-life choice bill. Another area which is not so common but is simmering away is the questions of eugenics and development aid. There is a certain pressure on some development agencies, and in some cases they agree to it, and others they resist, to include and to enforce birth control measures in exchange for development aid. In the area of social concerns, we have this peculiar legislation in New Zealand called Easter trading. You might say it's a relic of the past, but it is originally was designed as a protection of family time, with shops closed on Good Friday, Easter Sunday, Christmas Day, as well, of course, Anzac Day. But it is an indicator of social change that there is an increasing demand for 24-hour shopping. Another area of great concern in New Zealand is the high rate of incarceration, sadly disproportionate among the poor and ethnic minorities, including Maori and Pasifika peoples. There is a need for social change, particularly in our attitude towards incarceration and the uptake of systems of restorative justice. Also, care for those who are in prison. Earlier this year, the Latter-day Saints and the Catholic Church signed a memorandum of understanding about working together in prison chaplaincy, that we would alert each other to members of our respective faiths in need of chaplaincy services. And similar memoranda are being negotiated with members of other religions, particularly Muslim and Hindu. The situation of the 2 known Jewish people in prison has been addressed on an ad hoc basis. But I think you would appreciate the humour around the discovery that Catholics do not hold a monopoly on the prison population. Both Catholics and Mormons in prison have a strong sense of faith identity, even though some of them will say, well, I haven't been to church since I made my first communion, but I'm still a Catholic. And at its best is recognized as having potential for repentance and rehabilitation. A third area that I'd like to remember, and it's the final remark I would like to make about religious collaboration and religious freedom, is the welcome of refugees. The crisis in the Middle East, North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Europe is felt as far away as New Zealand. The current New Zealand government quota of UNHCR refugees stands at 750 and has not changed in over 30 years. There is growing pressure on the government to increase that quota and to allow for an emergency quota in order to receive some of the millions of people currently on the move. Some of the focus is those of the plight of those on Manus Island and in Nauru. There has been a mixed reaction. Solidarity and generosity on one hand, but on the other, fear and exclusion. Of greatest concern is the suggestion that Christians only may apply, a phrase that very thinly covers a latent Islamophobia in some sections of the New Zealand population. The New Zealand bishops have spoken out strongly about this in the name of religious freedom and our country's commitment to religious diversity. These challenges stress the need for all people of faith to work together to ensure that the dignity, the transcendent dignity of the human person in society, is upheld. There is a wide consensus amongst religious faiths that the human person is created in the image and likeness of God the Creator, the ultimate source of all life and love. For those of us who are Christian, this is framed within our belief in God as Trinity, a relational God, a God who invites us to live deeply in that relationship with God and with all other people and the whole of creation. The road lies ahead of us. Thank you.